Yes.
Is this
Yes.
better?
Yes, guys, can you see him? Way better. Yeah, I can see you. I think Chad can see you. I think we're good. This is fantastic.
Okay. What? God. Give me 1 second then. Let me just adjust it a little bit. Just take 1 second.
Use fake email. This is my work email. This is not my actual email. Guys, I need you guys to calm down for a second. This is my work. This is my stream email. This is not my actual email. I need you guys to calm down for a second. I know what I'm doing. It's okay. Arun, they're trolling. Yeah, anyone can find. Everyone is saying that you. A lot of people are saying that you're a very beautiful man. Like you are a very handsome dude in the chat.
Uh, who are they saying that about?
No, they're saying that about you.
Oh, that's very kind of them.
um,
I like these people already.
yeah, they. I mean, they are very nice. First off, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How? I mean, I
Uh,
know. Recently, I mean, I'm sure you've probably heard about the news that's happening in the United States. We're probably not going to touch upon that at all.
uh-huh.
But I was covering the assassination of Gilaman Wazir in KP
Uh-huh.
province, and I
Yeah.
was talking about how basically the you know in Pakistan political assassinations and not just Pakistan but in the subcontinent political assassinations are actually quite common. And I
Mm-hmm.
was talking about how they're being a journalist or being an activist in Pakistan is just you are constantly putting yourself in danger. What is just to overall start with the I guess the environment that people are. I guess that my first question would be, what do you think of the overall political atmosphere in Pakistan right now? Um,
Well, I mean, so currently, but there's an all-out crackdown happening against the PTI, the party led by Imran Khan.
mhm.
So there's a lot of media focus on that. There are women who are in jail for like almost a year, over a year now. Just today, the breaking news is that this one TikToker, PTI activist, Sanam Javed, who's been in jail for 14 months, she was released by the courts, and within a few hours, the police arrested her again in another case.
Right.
So it's clear that the administration is targeting one political party. And um, there is, of course, a cyclical process here because there was a time when Imran Khan and PTI were the favorites of the generals, and they were being used to target other political parties like the PMLN, the People's Party. So there's a cyclical cycle among political elites whereby one political elite is brought to the front. So there was at one point the People's Party did a deal with the establishment. PMLN did it, PTI did it, and then against these parties, an antithesis thesis is created. So a new political leader is created, political parties are created in order to ensure that the decisive factor in politics remains the military, the establishment. So there's that process that continues to happen. A few years ago, it was these other mainstream political party leaders, PMLN, PPP, who were being targeted. Now it's PTI that's being targeted. When they were being targeted, PTI was in power. Today, when PTI is being targeted, PMLN, People's Party, is in power. But really, these people are sandbags for the generals who are
Mhm.
the real power center in Pakistan. So this is the mainstream. But then you go to the peripheries. The peripheries are a very, very different ball game. Just like many countries in Pakistan, the relationship between the center and the periphery is neo-colonial, which in practice means that the exploitation that happens over there does not just happen through the legal means in which we understand capitalism to be exploitative generally at the level of production, at the level of work, but here we're talking about primitive forms of dispossession, of elimination, of war, of humiliation, of a very brute form of violence, spectacular forms of violence. So all uh, the kinds of laws that are that operate in the center, which are also like very much prone to being suspended, but that leads to an outrage if someone is targeted, if Nawaz Sharif is targeted, if Imran Khan is targeted, there's outrage. On the other hand, when violence happens on the peripheries, it's often there's this deafening silence, and that is increasing. This level of violence on the peripheries is increasing, and this all, of course, has a historical dimension with the military being a central partner of the US in this region for many years that has
Right.
allowed it to become the decisive factor. So it's a militarized country. It's a the decisive logic is one of militarized reason, and hence it is very difficult to do grassroots politics here.
Yeah. So first off, I want to ask about peripheries. So just to clarify, what you mean by peripheries are, um, uh, you are specifically talking about the frontier provinces. So Balochistan, KP, Gilgit Baltistan. Is that what you mean by frontier provinces? Or sorry, is that what you mean by the
By
peripheries?
peripheries.
Okay. So
Yes, so go ahead. No,
no, no, no, no, no.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. So I just wanted to ask that clarifying question first.
So it is Balochistan, it is parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, it's Gilgit-Baltistan, it's Kashmir, and Gilgit-Baltistan, Kashmir are special cases because these are administered zones. So they're not part of Pakistan. They are administered by Pakistan because they're part of the Kashmir dispute with India. And Balochistan and parts of KP are the sites of like repeated military operations over the past 50, 60 years. Balochistan has witnessed military operations since 1948. So there's almost at the birth of Pakistan, there was a military operation that allowed for the integration of a forceful integration of Balochistan into Pakistan. Um, and on the peripheries, you have a very different kind of relationship. The normal rules of citizenship don't work. They're suspended, uh, and hence you have this very odious policy of enforced disappearances, which is a huge issue in Pakistan.
Right.
Thousands of young people, some really bright young people, mostly students, mostly professionals belonging to the Baloch and the Pashtun community, mostly Baloch, they've gone missing over the years. So these are enforced disappearances that the state carries out. So it's literally you eliminate them without a trace, and yet you give a very powerful message to the entire community that your very existence is tied to the whims of some intelligence operatives in the country, which means that there is no recourse to law. Like if you go there, if you go to courts on the enforced disappearance cases, even the judges are helpless, the media is helpless. And it's a very open kind of a secret that this thing happens. Now, there's of course a history of enforced disappearances starting from Indonesia in the 1960s to Argentina to Chile.
Sri
But
Lanka as
Pakistan
well.
is Sri Lanka, of course, has a huge history of that, and Pakistan is currently one of the hotspots of this criminal policy, and it's mostly directed against Baloch and Pashtun dissidents, primarily against Baloch. And even 2 days ago in Quetta, you had a huge rally led by women against enforced disappearances, and the women were beaten up, and then you had mass protests, which is another feature of these movements, that women are often the ones leading these movements, because a lot of men of these families have already been arrested. So it's often their daughters or their sisters or their wives that are leading the movements, because the brothers are also extremely vulnerable. And that's also a dynamic that we saw, in Argentina. I don't know too much about the situation in Sri Lanka, but I'm assuming there's that dynamic over there as well. So yeah, that's the danger, that there's a threat to everyone. We all are under threat, but it's not equal. I'm sitting in Lahore, and the threat that I face is, I have a sedition case against me. I've been arrested, but I'm not as vulnerable as our comrades in Balochistan or the former FATA region bordering Afghanistan, because those are literally war zones, in which even the basic rules of the game, even by Pakistani standards, they're suspended.
So I want to talk a little bit about Sri Lanka's case a bit, because I think there's a element of what's going on in Sri Lanka in Pakistan as well. In that,
Hmm.
so a lot of the enforced disappearances in Sri Lanka were specifically targeted at the Tamil minority. And this was
Hmm.
because the Tamils basically occupy the northeastern coast of Sri Lanka. And within that,
Hmm.
there's a particular resource to Sri Lanka that is incredibly valuable, and that is the city of Trincomalee. Trincomalee hosts one of the deepest harbors, deepest natural harbors in the world, meaning it makes that city in particular vital for trade. So, what you see in Sri Lanka is you basically have what is a nationalist state, Sinhalese nationalist state, actually a similar situation to actually Israel, believe it or not, that is trying to take control of resources from a particular, that is trying to wrest resources from an ethnic minority into the direct hands of the state so that they can use it for capitalistic reasons. So, for example, Sri Lanka is a
Hmm.
crucial piece of the global neoliberal capitalist puzzle, right? They're a huge, they're vital for trade. They're vital for they are a potential forward base for larger powers, right? I'm I want to
Right.
say and I want to ask. I'm assuming that must be there. There probably is a similar situation for Balochistan, right? I'm assuming that ports like Gwadar and
Hmm.
Quetta's not a port, I don't think, but the coast of Balochistan is pretty vital, is it not?
Oh yeah, I mean, Balochistan has three misfortunes. One is the coast. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's a huge issue with Gwadar. Pakistan has been dreaming of turning it into a Dubai-like city, and there's now a Cold War taking place between American interest and Chinese interest in Gwadar. Um, so that's been an issue for the last 20 years. It's been a dream that's been sold. It's one of those dreams that the Pakistani elite comes up with every few years, that this will be a game changer. We're going to do this, and the economy is going to change. Not realizing that without thorough kind of a social revolution, it would be very difficult to have that kind of a change in Pakistan. So they would never want to talk about um, actually development of areas, development of communities, but often it's about development of particular strategic location that will change the fate of the nation. So it's a very top-down approach. So Gwadar is one of them. The second issue with Balochistan is that it is very rich in minerals. So you have copper, gold, a number of other minerals, and the mining interests are massive, and they're often fused with the military. Uh, so you have to remember that part as well, that if you want to do any kind of business in Balochistan, you have to go through the military. So the NOC is given by the military. So again, there are these mining interests that are massive, both international and local mining interests. And the third is the border with Afghanistan, which means that there's a big war economy. Historically, there's been this problem of um, orchestrating the entire Afghan jihad from the borders of Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And that led to a war economy. You had flow of weapons, you had flow of other kinds of goods. So that border, the Balochistan border with Afghanistan and even Iran, it becomes a very central site for smuggling, and a lot of money is made in that. It's usually again the establishment that or elements close to the establishment that oversees this illegal trade. So all these three factors make Balochistan a very lucrative thing. Now, when someone from Punjab, a bureaucrat or a military officer, is appointed in Balochistan, there's often a lot of excitement. Although, when you're going into a war zone in the periphery, you'd be very worried. But many people see it as an opportunity to make a lot of money, quick money, because as I said earlier, the rules are suspended, and it's really the whims of the bureaucrats and the military officers that decide uh, how the business will be done, and there's a lot of money, quick money to be made.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean that's geostrategic location, the ports, the minerals, all of them play a huge part.
Okay. So that, and then because you have, and so then in addition to that, because you have militant groups in the region that threaten sort of the Pakistani state interests, that leads to this sort of crackdown upon the Baloch population in Balochistan and just across Pakistan in general, because the BLA and you know, even though they have committed atrocities against civilians, uh, they they represent a potential threat to the Pakistani state in the sense of they are potentially denying the Pakistani state these resources, and as a result, the Pakistani state uses the presence of these militant organizations to basically persecute the Baloch people across Pakistan in general.
Well, I think the second part of your statement is more true. I think the BLA actually does not pose any substantial threat. I think their strategy is very suicidal. It's not a big guerrilla army. It's also, you have to understand that the population, the demographics are really against the Baloch. It's a huge province with a very tiny population,
Mm,
about anywhere between 10 to 12 million. And the Baloch are less than 60%. So the rest are Pashtuns and other ethnic groups. And there's a sizable number of Punjabis as well who live there. So it's a very small demographic group. And then you have other Baloch in Sistan province in Iran. And that's another kind of an issue for the Iranian state. So I personally, and this has been our public position and the position of the left for a very long time, that the Baloch threat is exaggerated by the state massively.
right,
And groups like BLA provide an excuse to the state to carry out all the atrocities that it does, and also they facilitate the censorship that happens in Balochistan,
right,
because they also often target Punjabi workers, they would target Pashtuns, they would target Sindhis, they would target other ethnicities as well. And then you have this rallying cry all across the country that we need more blood. And it's this vicious cycle. I think the more interesting groups in Balochistan that are actually raising the issue are the non-violent groups,
right,
people like Marang Baloch, Samidin Baloch, all these, but these women who've been at the forefront. I think this is a very different kind of Baloch leadership. They're female, and they're also connecting with progressives from across the country. And things like demographics and geography matter a lot. And I think this is the most um, potent threat to the establishment, uh, the threat in someone like Marang, because she can invoke sympathy across the country. She has that capacity, which groups like BLA have never had.
right. So basically, what you're, yeah. So what I meant by they pose a threat in the sense was the sense that they are not necessarily a threat, but they are attempting to in a sense, deny the the Pakistani state the resources. That's what I meant. But I would generally agree with that. You're right. Um, Maharang Baloch, I was covering. So I just want to, so I want to follow up on that. Uh, so have you seen, as a result of, people like Maharang Baloch, Samidin Baloch, um, and I think this is the last question I have for regarding, regarding
Right.
Balochistan. Have you, like, I want to talk a little bit more about the sort of resurgence for the sympathy that you're talking about. What So now do you see people in Punjab, people living in Sindh, you know, voicing their support for, at least the demilitarization of the direct, sort of the rules of the game being at least consistent across the board in Balochistan, like it is in Sindh and Punjab? Do you see a lot more voices on the ground with regards to voicing support for the regular people of Balochistan, or what's the sort of ground level that you see right now, at least in Punjab and Lahore?
I don't. I can't really hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Could you repeat part of the question because I think I lost you.
Okay, so my question,
I
I'll
can hear
sum it
you
up.
better.
So
Yeah.
basically, to what extent do you see that as a result
Yeah, I
of?
can. Yeah.
So, what extent do you see the sympathy of the on what level are you able to see the sympathy that Marang Baloch is galvanizing and ushering for her cause, and as well as the Baloch cause overall? What kind of shift in attitude do you see? Do you see more people voicing their support
I
against
think
the
I think it's
kidnappings?
Punjab.
Hello, are you there?
I think it's increased. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, got it.
Um, I I think it's increased massively. The support has increased massively, and part of the reason is that as often is the case, the violence in the peripheries never fully stays in the peripheries. It eventually starts haunting the center as well. And we've seen over the last 10 years, there's been this attempt to silence journalists, silence civil society activists, silence professors, students in the core, in Lahore, in Islamabad, in Karachi, and many of these other cities. And also, there's a growing consciousness now. PTI is the latest victim, but before that, you had PTM, you had students' marches in Punjab that were attacked. You had a farmers' movement, which was called the Okara Military Farmers Movement, which is this old colonial arrangement where the military are the landlords in a lot of areas across Punjab, and the farmers are the tenants. And so there's those tenants organized themselves for their rights in the early 2000s when the military tried evicting them. So there's that kind of memory. There's a memory of all these movements that's combining, and Aurat March as well. They've also connected with Maharang and others. And I think there's because of the kinds of violence that have come so close home to Punjab and Sindh and other parts. I think it's no longer viewed as something that's out there. Violence has become a more intimate uh, thing, even in the core. It has an intimate place in our lives. And one, I think, incredible thing that Maharang was able to do was she did this long march earlier this year at the peak of silence across Pakistan on the issue of enforced disappearance or generally militarization. And her long march, which passed through Punjab and went to Islamabad, it galvanized the civil society and the media who were looking for some kind of a leader who would take the lead and uh, and put this question of militarization and censorship and authoritarianism back on the agenda. And she was able to do that, and I think she garnered a lot of sympathy from across the political spectrum for her cause.
Got you. Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to shift a little bit away from Balochistan, and I want to talk a little bit about the Saraiki Wasaib movement. Um, and so I'm sure you're
Mhm.
probably familiar with our mutual friend Ammar, otherwise known as Donnie Darko online. Um, and so
Of
he,
course, yeah.
yeah. So what is so I want to know what first off what Haqooq-e-Khalq's position on the idea of a Saraiki Wasaib is, and what the party position on, and I want to know how much the Haqooq-e-Khalq party like interacts with the Saraiki movement as well. If you could give me some details on that.
Well, we all so it's interesting. I mean, for Haqooq-e-Khalq Party, we have a separate wing in the Saraiki say. Um, but it's not just us. Actually, interestingly, all political parties have separate wings. For I mean, some call it Saraiki and Punjabi, others call it South Punjab versus North or Central Punjab. But there's an acceptance across the political spectrum that something has to be done in terms of giving representation to the Saraiki region. For me, it's also a personal thing because my mother is Saraiki, and she's from DG Khan, and it's a very big province, Punjab. Even if you look at it from an administrative point of view, uh, at the moment we have about 100 million people. Um, some say 120 million people. So it's almost kind of impossible to run that kind of province. And if you look at the patterns of development and underdevelopment, the indicators are clear that the Saraiki Wasaib is lagging behind. And that's, of course, partly due to the historical underdevelopment and the class structure that appeared. And then it's also because of the spending priorities of the state. So you get all the money. I mean, one of the reasons why you have a demand for a separate province is because the province has the right to prioritize development in particular sectors and see which sectors and which
We lost him.
regions
So
will see the investment for infrastructure, for education, and for development. And clearly, is the basis for the grievance that the Saraiki people have, and I think that without
we're sorry,
resolution of
Amar.
that
Your
crisis,
answer's
which
been
is
cutting in and out.
something.
Sorry, your answer's been cutting in and out.
Could you hear
Could you
me?
repeat it again?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Your answer's been cutting in and out because on our end, like the video's been frozen a little bit, so that's why.
Okay. Let me give me 1 minute.
Got you. Thank you.
Uh, can you hear me better?
Yeah, I can hear you better. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me. Is this being? Also, just give me 1 minute. Let me just change the place and see if it has any impact.
Okay.
So were you able to hear anything I said?
I got the gist of what you were saying. Basically, that for a long time, that Multan and Multan, Dera Ghazi Khan, and the southern part of Punjab province, Saraiki Wasaib, it is
Yeah,
incredibly underdeveloped, and basically that part of the reason for the demand for Saraiki Wasaib was that um, the province, the provincial level is able to prioritize development in that particular region, and that it is, and the reason is that a separate Saraiki Wasaib would actually would actually prioritize development of the region.
absolutely. You said it more you eloquently than I would have. Is this clear?
Yes, way clearer.
Okay, great. So that's exactly what I wanted to say. What you just summarized, basically that, yeah. So I mean, there is uneven development, and this uneven development then leads to further exploitation, because um, the Saraiki region then becomes primarily a space for cheap labor for the factories up north
Mhm.
or down south in Karachi. So for the last 20 years, uh, even the development that has happened in Karachi has been fueled by Sindhi and Saraiki labor. And that's one of the big changes that have happened in Karachi, actually, in terms of migration from the Saraiki region, and that's a very important part of the story. So I think any region that lags behind, it's very natural that there will be anger, there'll be resentment, and I think there is a broad consensus among political parties, and that's something that you would know, and Ammar would know better, that at every election, every political party talks about creating a Saraiki province. But there's also a lot of opposition from the state, because the state feels that if Punjab is divided like that, then they will open up a Pandora's box, because that's their claims in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where you have the Hazarvi community, who want a separate province from the Pashtuns. Then you have Pashtuns in Balochistan who want a separate province. So Achakzai and his party believe in, they call it Southern Pakhtunkhwa, uh, the region of Balochistan where Pashtuns live. And then you have this crisis in Sindh, where some groups in Karachi, particularly the Mahajers, have often talked about a Mahajar province, a separate province from Sindh, which is an explosive idea that the Sindhis reject. So those are some of the tensions that are part of the consideration why no political party actually goes ahead with it. And then you have the added layer that it's not doing so is also extremely profitable for those in Punjab, because then you can take from the south and invest in the north.
Gotcha. So basically, it's a mix of Punjab stands to gain from the provincial government of Punjab stands to gain from having Saraiki Wasaib as part of Punjab, and then on top of that, well, I do wonder though, because I would imagine, so do the Pashtuns, for example, in Balochistan have a similar, I guess, economic grievance in Balochistan to the same sort of grievances that the Saraiki community have in Punjab, or do
Yeah, it's mostly around jobs.
mm,
Um, so I mean, in Balochistan, the big problem is when it comes to jobs or quotas in medical colleges, for example, and because the primary employer in Balochistan is the state, and so if you're not that into politics, or even if you are into politics, but you want a job, you look towards the state, and for that you need education. So one of the big fights that happen is over quotas in educational institutes, and there you have a lot of enmity between, or clashes that happen between Pashtuns, Baloch, and even Hazaras. So Hazaras get extremely, extremely upset when uh, when they are unable to get admissions to certain colleges because there's a quota for the Baloch. So there's that kind of tension. The other tension is that, which is the grievance from the Baloch side, that the FC, the frontier coast that does the worst kind of violence in Balochistan, it is often made up of Pashtuns, and Pashtuns from Waziristan. Um, so Waziristan, of course, is an area which has been the epicenter of both the Afghan jihad in the 80s and the war on terror. So it's a very heavily militarized but also traumatized region, and that's the region which was the epicenter for the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement. So while Pashtuns over there in Waziristan are suppressed, many of them are recruited in the frontier corps and then made to do terrible things for the Pakistani state in Balochistan. which is part of how a neocolonial management of violence takes place. That you use different communities against each other. So there are all those grievances that accumulate, which is why it's been tough historically to make different ethnic groups, even those that are marginalized, work together because they have a lot of internal distrust.
And I'm assuming so. It's like you said, the internal distrust is partially sowed by the state directly. Like you said, with regards
Yeah,
to the administration, yeah, with regards to jobs, quotas, and
there's
whatnot.
that. Yeah, there's that. There's of course there are longer histories as well. I mean, in Sindh, it's partly the state, but it's also partly the nature, the chaotic nature of partition. You have uh, millions of people enter Pakistan, and then they reach Karachi and they speak a different language and they're more educated, um, and they become very prominent in the new state. And those who've been there for a very long time, uh, they feel threatened, and you have these tensions. And then this, you see, the state cannot create tensions from zero. What it does is it looks at historical material, some kind of historically sedimented contradiction, and then uses it for precise reasons. So it can't create history in that sense, but it can amplify certain contradictions and downplay others. It can elevate certain antagonisms and ignore others. So there's that management of conflict between people in such a way that the state emerges on top every time. That's
Right,
that's the rationale behind this kind of management. Yeah.
right. So going back to Saraiki Wasaib, do you think? I mean, because of the economic exploitation that many working class people in the Saraiki Wasaib, have to deal with especially from the Punjab province, the provincial government as well as the state itself. I would imagine that there's an easy sort of synergy or a synthesis that you can reach. There's a working class, sort of underbelly or a working
Mhm.
class undercurrent to sort of proletarian undercurrent to the Saraiki Vase movement, right? I would imagine that, especially with
Yeah.
regards to the left. So, how do you think I mean, I know you've said that the various political parties of Pakistan have all basically said um, they've all said that we need to create Saraiki Vase, but then the state sees it's not it would flare tensions among different ethnic groups in different provinces, as well as they have economically to gain from keeping Saraiki Wasaib as part of Punjab. But what do you think the left in Pakistan? What is the overall sentiment of the left in Pakistan towards the Saraiki Wasaib movement? And do you think that um, there's do you think that we could there's a way of basically, I mean, obviously part of it is the fact that the Saraiki people have their own sort of culture. They have their own identity that is they've been fighting to keep it, and they have to deal with a lot of, I guess, Punjabi nationalists that would like to deny that sort of identity. But the way Ammar Donnie explained it to me was like we've all said, there's an economic, they're being exploited by the rest of Punjab. So I would imagine that there's a natural sort of synergy that within the Saraiki Wasai movement and the left parties like Haqooq-e-Khalq or Mazdur Kisan is led by Taimur Rahman. I would imagine there's a natural synergy there that
So there are two, three ways of looking at it. The first is the historical aspect of it.
right.
And the historical aspect is important because we are in the process of rebuilding the left. There was a complete rupture after the fall of the Soviet Union. The left collapsed in Pakistan.
Hmm.
Um, and when people like us joined the left, maybe 15 years ago, as students, there wasn't much of a left at all. So you wouldn't be able to name anybody in their 30s, 40s who would be with the left, right? So leftists used to be people in their 60s, 70s. So there's that historical connection is gone. Historically, the Saraiki Wasaib was the site of some of the most militant farmers' movements and landless workers' movements. One of the groups that organized massively uh, in the Saraiki Wasaib, particularly around Vihadi and Dera Ghazi Khan, was the Mazdoor Kisan Party, which is now led by Taimur Rahman, but now it's a shell of its former self. I mean, we're talking about the heydays of the Maoist movement, the left, the 70s, 80s. Um, the 1970 is the year when you had this massive Kisan conference, this massive peasants conference, farmers conference in Toba Tek Singh, which is on the border between Punjab, central Punjab, and the Saraiki region. And people from both sides showed up. This was a massive rally. Faiz Ahmed Faiz, a very famous poet, was there. Habib Jalab was there, and actually the person leading that rally was Maulana Bhashani, who was from East Pakistan, back then now Bangladesh. So this was a moment of the coming together of a lot of different eclectic groups and showed the possibility of a very different kind of a Pakistan. Now those dreams kind of collapsed. And now we're in the process of rebuilding. The rebuilding of the left has primarily happened in uh, cosmopolitan centers. Um, the phase that we were in 10 years ago was basically you had some people who were professionals or teachers or students in Karachi, in Lahore, in Islamabad, in Peshawar, in Quetta, who started getting um, who started getting interested on the questions of the left. There was no mass space. We are in the process of building that with the workers movement in Faisalabad, which is massive, which is part of our party. One of our leaders, Baba Latif, who's an amazing organizer, and we're working now in Kot Lakhpat in Lahore. Now, interestingly, despite the fact that we haven't done a lot of work in the Saraiki Wasaib at the moment, because this is where we're based and we're showing solidarity to those movements, but our main work is here in the factories here where we work. um, a large number of workers that you find are workers from the Saraiki Wasaib, both in Lahore and in Faisalabad. And so you can see already that the proletariat, even in the core, is actually Saraiki and Pashtun. So those two ethnicities are very, very prominent. People call them here Pardesi, so from a foreign land. And there's often this idea that the Pardesis are more uh, loyal, more militant, more trustworthy in this politics, in workers' politics. And they're these workers' hostels where you'll see people from Muzaffargarh, DG Khan, Kotadu, all these uh, immensely poor regions of Saraiki Wasaib who've come here to support their families back home. Now, uh, going into the Saraiki Wasaib uh, would would have they will have to be a very serious debate on how to operate over there, because there are two, three issues. Despite the fact there is that, of course, that extreme poverty, it's also a region that has a huge imprint of mainstream Pakistan. So the most popular political party, or because I told you my family, my mother is from DG Khan. Uh, the most popular political party right now is the PTI, and the second most is the People's Party. So these are, it's a very mainstream kind of a region. So it's nothing like Balochistan in that sense, which has a very different rhythm to it. The other issue that's very different is that the elites of the Saraiki region are nothing like the Baloch elites. So the Baloch elites uh, are extremely marginalized. Apart from some of them, they most elite Baloch families that have that have formed large parties, that have organized. They've confronted the state and they've suffered massively, including Nawab Akbar Bukti, who was killed by the Pakistani state. He was one of the founding members of Pakistan. He was close to Jinnah uh, in 46, 47, 48. So, so there's that kind of violence that happens in Balochistan. The elites in the Saraiki region are extremely integrated with Lahore. All of them study in Lahore. And when we were growing up in Lahore, it was a very common thing here that if there's a Saraiki kid in in our schools or anywhere in our social circle, he or she would be the richest out of everybody else, uh, because these are landed elites and they have access to state power, which means that they often use the Saraiki slogan to increase their bargaining position in Islamabad. And you've had presidents who are Saraiki, you've had prime ministers who are Saraiki, you have foreign ministers who are Saraiki. So so what I'm trying to say, it's the issue is slightly more subtle as compared to other regions, the peripheries that we're talking about. It's that wouldn't mean that it's not there. As I've already said, there's a very stark difference in development between the regions, the north and the south, but it's different. Um, so one of the things would be, how do you wean the people away from the attachment to the landlords who become the final arbiters of the interest of Saraikis in Islamabad. And for that, we've had some meetings. So we had one comrade of ours who ran in the election recently from Bahawal Nagar, which is uh, in the Saraiki region, and he got a decent amount of votes. He ran a good campaign, and he was talking about the level of poverty that exists. And one thing that he was saying is that the one question on which people can be organized is the anti-feudal question, the class question, um, because the feudals already used the Saraiki question and then betray the people. So that question has to be our starting point. I mean, we cannot go behind, we cannot be less progressive than the feudals on the question of Saraiki identity. But we have to take a step further and talk about the class question, because what we call in Marxist theories the surplus population, people without a future, people without jobs, that phenomenon is on the rise massively in the Saraiki region. And without organizing these surplus populations, we cannot think of a future left strategy. So I think that as we expand, we'll have to center it. And already in Lahore, Faisalabad, Jhang, Toba, where we're working, we often find that the most militant working class elements are the Saraiki people.
Understood. Understood. Um, by the way, this is a conversation, so it's not just an interview. If you have any questions to ask me, then by all means go ahead. It's not a
Sure, 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 sure.
it's a far more I don't want this to be a very stiff conversation where I just keep asking you or interrogating you. But yeah, I
No, no,
mean,
no, no. I'm happy.
so I guess so I also want to talk about the resurgence of the Taliban in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Um, what because I think recently if I'm not mistaken, there was an attack by the Taliban recently in KP, or was or at least a resurgence in far right reactionary. At least I know for a fact that a tourist was attacked in Swat recently. So you do see a
Mhm.
rise in the far right in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But I also I've also been seeing reports of the TTP gaining ground in KP. What do you think could be the reason for that? What do you think could be the reason for the resurgence of the Taliban in the KP?
Well, I mean, the Taliban is a problem in terms of its relationship to the Pakistani state. I mean, you see, extremism in Pakistan uh, is not something that can be analyzed simply in terms of the social trends. I mean, there's no doubt Pakistan is uh, generally speaking, a conservative place as compared to many other countries in the world. That's at least my reading of Pakistan. But that doesn't mean that, one, there's not space to be not conservative at the social level. And also that the one advantage that Pakistan has had is that Pakistan, because of a very peculiar history of Muslim politics in Pakistan, in the subcontinent, um, the top leadership of all political parties that have actually won have always been kind of center right, you know, not too right on religious issues. However, the state has has continuously cultivated religious groups as proxies. Now, the history of the Taliban, as we know, this was a proxy war that Pakistan was fighting on behalf of the U.S. against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and that destroyed Afghanistan, it destroyed Pakistan. It was a needless war against the progressive government, and we created um, militant outfits and militant camps throughout the country, and that became that in a way was the beginning of our addiction to war, the Pakistani state's addiction to war. And then after 2001, we took a U-turn after 9/11, and the jihadis, the heroes from the 1980s, became the terrorists of the 2000s. But the Pakistani state also kept playing this double game because they felt that these were geostrategic assets, and that at some point, in order to control Afghanistan, we will need the Taliban. And there was this theory called the strategic depth, that in order to fight with India, we will need some strategic depth. We'll get extra space if we have Afghanistan aligned with us to place our tanks, to place our armor, our weapons in a zone that's not in the reach of the Indian Air Force. So there's that entire strategy uh, kind of blew up in our face uh, when basically in 2014 we had the Army public school massacre, in which dozens of kids were massacred by the Taliban. Over 100 kids were killed, and then there were these military operations. However, over the last 4 or 5 years, there have been all these attempts to rehabilitate the Taliban, to negotiate with the Taliban. Imran Khan was a major proponent of that theory, uh, and no political party was willing to take a very strong position against the Taliban other than the ANP, the Awami National Party in Pakhtunkhwa, and their entire leadership and cadres were wiped out by the Taliban in suicide bombings. So the cost of taking on the Taliban was too high for political parties. And for the military, they remain very important interlocutors between, one, the Afghan Taliban, and two, in order to control any unruly elements in the region. So recently in the elections, uh, Mohsen Dawud, who's one of the former leaders of PTM, now he has his own political party. He was a parliamentarian, and he contested from Waziristan, did a fantastic campaign. But during the campaign, he was fired upon by the Taliban. Um, so his allegation is that the state was using the Taliban to wipe him out, just like they've used the Taliban to wipe out ANP and many other political opponents. And before that, the state was using the Taliban to continue the fight in Afghanistan, so that when the US leaves, it leaves on terms that are acceptable to the Pakistani state. So there's this tension, and now another military operation has been announced in Balochistan and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And part of the problem is that there has never been any civilian oversight of any military operation, so that even if people feel like supporting some kind of a response against the threat of the Taliban, but if there's no civilian oversight, then we're expecting once again mass graves, pervasive violence, unhindered violence. um, without any accountability, and the enrichment of a few generals who are addicted to this war economy. And this is the same problem with this other group, the TLP, which is the group that organizes around blasphemy. The sentiment has existed for a very long time, but the state nurtured them literally and literally brought them to Islamabad in 2017 when they were not even a political party in order to undermine the Nawaz Sharif government. This is the time when they were trying to support Imran Khan's ascent. Um, and now this is a Frankenstein monster which cannot be controlled very easily by anyone. So the state again looks at the possibilities, of course, historically created possibilities, and then picks the worst elements, elevates them, and uses them to fight opponents. And then there's blowback, and they don't think about the blowback till it hits them in their face, and then they start fighting blowback by creating new proxies, and then there's new blowback. So there's they're going from one crisis to another, trying to manage one crisis after another without realizing that they are themselves the real crisis, the source of the crisis.
Right. So going to Imran Khan for a second, because I've actually read your I read a decent chunk of your Jacobin article regarding Imran Khan. And so he's I know you have a lot of criticisms with the way I guess the West lionizes Imran Khan in a sense as this sort of anti-imperialist figure. When
Hmm.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the uh, the relationship that the IMF now has with Pakistan right now is part and parcel due to Imran Khan's administration. Am I not incorrect? Am I incorrect about that? Or
Well, he accelerated it. It's a historical relationship that he accelerated. He did not uh, fight it. He gave up our state bank to the IMF despite opposition, and he bulldozed it through the parliament. And he's admitted that the parliamentary proceedings were often engineered by the ISI. He got the votes, and there you go. The state bank is now independent, and he appointed a former employee who was at the time working at the IMF. So former employee just brought him to head the state bank, which is our central bank. And then once his tenure was over, he went back to work for the IMF. That's a definition of anti-imperialism that I've never heard yet.
uh,
So
so I mean, and also in addition to that, the sort of brokering of power, or the I guess the sort of it's the other thing that I think Imran Khan might have also done, which was not great, which was again, like you said, it was the sort of negotiations with the Taliban, which I think pretty much, if I'm not mistaken, basically blew up in everyone's face at the moment.
yeah, I mean, it was the Taliban, it was his support for the TLP. Again, the group that organizes on blasphemy. He even said something like he and his supporters want to join the movement being led by TLP, things like that. Um, his huge support for General Bajwa, the guy who eventually ousted him. Initially, I mean, there are all these statements that you'll see from his past, where he's praising military generals, he's praising from General Musharraf to General Rahil Sharif to General Bajwa, all these military generals who he was very close to. He was supporting the ISI in interviews, defending the ISI. Um, uh, Journalists were abducted during his time. The sedition case against me was put up during his time. Now, my position is that I mean, he's at this point, he's extremely popular. There's no doubt, and it's partly because of the way he was removed. It's partly because after that, the economy continued to downslide, and now we feel we've hit rock bottom. But every few weeks, we realize there's more ground beneath to fall to. So there's a free fall that the economy is in, and there's been a lot of oppression of PTI workers. So in all of that, he naturally has become a lot more popular than he was, and I think probably easily the most popular politician in the country right now, which he wasn't 3 years ago. People were predicting a total disaster, electoral disaster for him, and that has reversed. But more than being upset with him, I think it's important to realize that the principal contradiction in Pakistan is not Imran Khan or Shahbaz Sharif or Nawaz Sharif or Bilal Bhutto. It is at the core of Pakistan's politics. It is the military establishment,
Right.
and the military uses all these politicians as sandbags that it uses to launch all its fire, all its missiles, and then throws the sandbags away when they're not needed. And that's when, people like Nawaz Sharif and Nawaz Sharif was their man. Then they threw him out. He became a rebel. Then at one point, Bhutto was their man. Then he rebelled. He was in Ayub Khan's cabinet. He rebelled against them, and then that became a problem. So, and now Imran Khan, he was their man, he rebelled against them because there's a structural problem with this democratic setup that the de jure, like the legal relationship, is that the prime minister is the boss and the army chief is the subordinate. But the de facto thing is the army chief controls his boss. Now, if the boss starts acting like a boss, which often happens 2 3 years in into the office, like they start realizing, well, technically we have power, um, and we can do things legally. It's it's our signature that's needed on everything. Then you have a contradiction between the military chief and the prime minister. So it's kind of like inbuilt into the system. It's a structural contradiction, and it's often this excessive attention on politicians is is something that's I think it's a distraction from the main kind of argument, the main problem, the principal contradiction, which is the disastrous role played by the military establishment in Pakistani politics.
Mm, that makes a lot more sense. That so basically your criticism is that the focus on a particular politician is kind of somewhat distracting from the main issue, which is the military control of the country. The military is the largest. They are the largest landowners in the country, are they not?
They're the largest landowners. They're the largest financial entity, period. If you look at their worth in terms of they're big on the banking sector, in land, fertilizers, transport. Biggest transport uh, business is also controlled by the military, the NLC, and they even have like marriage halls. Like they run literally. I don't think any military does that. Like run marriage halls for private marriages.
Well,
They make cereals as well, like for breakfast cereals. Uh, it's a multi-talented military in that sense, Um and it all and now it's even producing cultural artifacts. They have their own TV, their supported TV channels, their entertainment industry. There's this one channel, Green TV, which is widely believed to be sponsored by them. So it's they can do anything. They're like uh, their tentacles are everywhere, and without talking about them, and what to do with them, more importantly, um, we will not understand. Uh, we will not be able to get like a proper bearing, our bearings correct on understanding Pakistani politics.
so this is a sentiment that the military controls everything. That is a well-known sentiment in Pakistan across the board. So I guess the next question is, where do we go from here? Where
And
exactly?
that's the problem. That is a big problem. And our thesis, the party's thesis, is that authoritarianism, the the social roots of authoritarianism in Pakistan are not. uh, based on the hatred of one political party or one figure, be it Nawaz Sharif, Imran Khan, Bilawal, or even the military. The social roots are that the state and its development model is one that requires massive exploitation of the people uh, without creating a productive elite, even in bourgeois terms. So by that we mean you don't have an elite. You don't have an elite that's interested in long-term industrialization, that's interested in creating factories, interested in improving production. What they want to do is sell the land, sell the resources to the highest bidder internationally, and get a cut. So the worst form of compradors that you can imagine, and then spend the money that they've gained to buy luxury products. And if you need to stimulate the economy, you go to the IMF, you go to international creditors, you get as many loans as possible. But then you don't invest in anything that's productive. You cut spending on health, on education. Pakistan is behind almost every other country in terms of health and education, social indicators in South Asia, let alone the world. And the water, like 40% of deaths in Pakistan are now due to waterborne diseases. 40%. It's mostly because children die very young because of waterborne diseases. 80% of Pakistani water is actually not safe for drinking, even for Pakistanis. So, so that's the kind of world you've created, and it's all done through uh, finance, global and local finance. And then when you've not done anything productive to return the money, then what do? You tax the hell out of the population. You put all kinds of taxes. And right now, if you're earning like um, about, let's say, $1,000 in Pakistan a month, which very few people are earning that much. But let's say, you're middle class, you're earning $1,000. Um, you will be spending at least 700 of those dollars just to repay the loan that was taken by the elites for their luxuries. So that means about every 10 hours of work that you do, 7 hours you're working for someone else's luxuries and 3 hours for yourself. Um, and one of the most spectacular examples of this kind of elite capture is the fact that this UNDP report came out in 2019 during Imran Khan's era, actually, which suggested that the amount of subsidies being given to the elites amounts to $17.4 billion per year. That is about 6 times more than the budget given for the welfare of the poorest 40%. And these elites are about 1 to 2%. So this is really a welfare state for the elites. It's socialism for the rich. And it's unsustainable. Now, when you have that kind of situation, you'll have populations that are surplus populations that don't have a future. You have young people uh, uh, and finishing their degrees in universities, but they don't have jobs. You have working class families with like 5 kids, and three of them don't have jobs. You have increasing amount of lawlessness, criminal activity, drug abuse, and to control all of that, you will always have a security a paranoia of, like, first insecurity among the elites. They feel that they realize they have their islands of luxury surrounded by an ocean of misery, and that will create the market of the military. That will create a market for security, and that security will eventually be provided by the most organized force that maintains a monopoly of violence, and that will be the military. So there are these social roots of this militarization and the propensity of the elites to gravitate towards militarization and the military whenever there's a crisis stems from this kind of extreme rot in the economic order.
Mm. I'm gonna slightly pivot away from the sort of talk of the military because as an Indian, I've always been curious as to sort of the caste dynamics of Pakistan because in comparison to India, the sort of caste never gets talked about in Pakistan. But I have my understanding of the caste dynamics in Pakistan are that what we know as caste in India has basically sort of morphed into a sort of religious form of bigotry in the sense of a lot of the people that, or it's either been obscured by the sort of class society or it's been obscured by sort of the religious bigotry that we see coming from people like the TLP, from organizations like the TLP. And as such, a lot of the people that we would consider to be from the most marginalized castes are actually, if you look at what their religion is, they're very likely, religious minorities. They're Christians or they're Hindus, right? Could you, I mean, could you elaborate a little bit more on sort of how caste works in Pakistan uh, in comparison to, caste in India?
Well, caste is more invisible in the political scene because the organizing principles of the Pakistan movement, because of the pressures of the demographics in colonial India, particularly around separate electorates, which meant Muslims had separate elections. It meant that the Muslim vote had to be consolidated. And that was a broader kind of um, a pressure that a minority faces. You kind of suppress your internal differences in order to create a united front. And that then became the logic of the state, which got really, really elevated, which meant that almost any kind of cleavage was viewed as an attack on the identity of Pakistan. So something like being Bengali, being Pashtun, being Baloch. However, um, at the level of society, at the level of even work or production, caste plays a huge role in Pakistan. And part of the reason that you don't have uh, a lot of a lot of politics around caste, like agitation around caste, is partly also related to the fact that there's not a lot of class politics. Because if you go into the working class in if you meet the working class in rural areas, it's a very much um, caste segregated society. So you can tell who the where the Muslim sheikhs live, who are descendants of uh, or related to the Dalits, and where the Sayyids live, where the Chaudhurys live, where the Jats live. These are very there's still that kind of a social apartheid that happens. Um, and when the Mazdoor Kisan Party was organizing the farmers' movement in Punjab, that element was very, very visible. That element is also visible in the Hari movement from the 60s, 70s in Sindh, where the low caste, they were the ones that were giving the numbers to any kind of a movement. Now, one interesting thing is that caste does play a role in elections in Pakistan. Not in the same way as in India in terms of like caste antagonisms, but more like one people of particular caste going to people of another caste to try to vote as a bloc. That plays a role in Pakistani politics, which is why everybody ensures that on the electoral posters that they have, their caste is mentioned, um, and they try to meet people from different castes in order to get their votes. So there is an invisibility, although there's a social there's it's a very important part of our social reality. But in terms of political discourse, there's invisibility of caste other than during elections, and that partly has to do with the hyper Pakistani Muslim identity that the state promotes, and the low intensity of class struggle or class politics in the countryside.
So that's actually something that I find quite interesting because, so if you look at actually the various forms of nationalism, so in this case, I guess you would what you would call Pakistani nationalism, Pakistani state national, civic nationalism. But in India, if you look at Hindu nationalism, even though Hindu nationalism is trying to basically reinforce the Manusmriti, which is the religious text that gives us the Chaturvarna system and gives us the religious justification for caste. You see a lot of people basically trying to brush a lot of Hindu nationalists trying to basically brush caste under the rug. And
Mhm,
if you actually look at Sri Lanka's situation, you see a very similar thing where both the
mhm,
Sinhalese and the Tamils, for different reasons, have basically brushed caste under the rug. So, for example, if you look at the Sinhalese society, the main uniting force that basically buried caste was Sinhalese Buddhist nationalism. And it was you were talking about compradors earlier. If you look at
mhm.
the Sinhalese, if you look at the Sri Lankan, especially if you look at the elites of Sri Lanka, starting from 1948, actually even until today, they all the leaders come from one particular caste. They come from the landowning caste of Sri Lanka. So those, but it's because you have this sort of state ideology. In Pakistan's case, it's civic nationalism. In Sri Lanka's case, it's an ethnic nationalism. It's Sinhalese Buddhist nationalism. You have
Mhm,
this sort of brushing under the rug of these very real apartheid like um,
mhm.
sort of divisions in society.
Separations.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's one thing that I've noticed across the board. Whenever caste is not talked about, it is usually due to the fact that there is a governing ideology or there's some sort of governing political force that has basically forced these caste conversations to be buried. And then the Tamils in Sri Lanka, obviously, there's a less discussion about caste because they were basically, uh, they are currently in the process of a genocide at the moment. They're
Yeah.
the war
Yeah.
crimes that happened since 1983 until 2009. They have,
Mhm.
and then obviously if you look at
And yeah,
1948, you have different settler colonial projects. So that's one thing I've noticed across the subcontinent. It's that whenever there's a obscuring of caste, it's usually due to nationalism.
right. And there's a much longer history of that. Um, and there are two ways in which this happens. One is, as you rightly point out, the majority is something like the Sinhalese, but also like if you look at, I was just reading this very interesting book by this American historian Gerald Horne called "The Counter Revolution of 1776." So he claims that the independence of the U.S. was actually a counter-revolution against the abolition of slavery. But one of the things that he talks about is how in the 17th, 18th century, the idea of whiteness became very important uh, in order to create a unified bloc against the threats of indigenous people and African slaves. And that required a suppression of the ethnic, religious, caste differences among white people. In order to create a hegemonic kind of an order, you needed to the erasure of those differences. And that's also true for movements that are oppressed, right? I mean, as you pointed out with the Tamil movement, it's very difficult to fight back against erasure, and in this case, uh, actual physical erasure, if you highlight internal differences too much. So the category of the Baloch, for example, I mean, naturally, there a lot of differences, class, ethnic, and caste differences within the Baloch community. and with very deadly past and presence. Same with Pashtuns. But when you're facing state onslaught, then you try to create some kind of a unified front. And the challenge for progressives is how do you create that unity without which there's erasure, without necessarily uh, erasing the significant internal differences that need to be sorted out if the dialectic of history is to move forward. Uh, because if you create a counter hegemonic project that permanently suppresses these kinds of differences, these differences will not go away. History doesn't go away just because you want it to go away. They will keep haunting the new project and will turn it into a monstrous project. So this kind of self-awareness about the strategic and the tactical. The tactical is where you forget differences and work together. The strategic is the long-term horizon where you know that you have to overcome those historical differences through reconciliation and justice, not through violence or just moving on or something like that. So I think that remains an important part of the challenge for the left in the 21st century.
Hmm. Have you seen a lot of have you seen a lot of solidarity coming from leftists in India, would you say? Or would you say that because of India's own political arrangement or political situation that there's been not a lot of there's been not an adequate amount of, I guess, solidarity and cooperation among the, I would actually also chalk it up to be because of the even with Congress in power, even with the Indian National Congress in power, there's still a level of hyper civic nationalism that there's a skepticism with working, with a leftist organization in India working with leftist organizations in Pakistan, right? There's a sort of a crackdown, if you will. Would you say that that would you say that sentiment A exists in Pakistan? And on top of that, would you also say that there's this thing that I've been feeling where the left across the subcontinent in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh has basically been severed, partially, I mean, by the British when the subcontinent itself was partitioned, but since then, you have the neo-colonial governments of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh as well that are reinforcing the sort of
Mhm.
cleaving apart of a united left front in the subcontinent.
Right. I think it's a very sensitive issue. Like, um, I would, for example, I would not even want my Indian comrades to be in trouble because of me, because they're in touch with me or someone on the Pakistani left. Um, Same goes for like, I think the sentiment is kind of mutual on the other side as well. Now, 1990s and early 2000s was a good time, relatively speaking, in terms of Pakistan-India relations. And the older generation of leftists had very deep ties. Um, Across the border because many of them had worked together in United India. So there was that legacy, that history, that memory. But in the last 15 years, since the Mumbai attacks, there's a lot of nervousness on both sides. I mean, we don't get visas um, to visit each other. People, I mean, I don't think any Indian leftist has come to Pakistan in almost maybe 2 decades, and the same might be true uh, the other way. So there's that kind of there's very real physical barriers. Then you have the intelligence. We already have so many problems, right? Like tactically, one thinks, why create another one? We're accused of being Indian agents. They're accused of being Pakistani agents. And God knows we've not received 1 rupee from India. Nobody has even offered it to me. So I can't even say I've rejected it. So it's like, these are all fictions in the head of the state. Um, and, if you remember the GNU movement, the big thing was these are Pakistani agents, these are
Right.
Pakistani ISI agents. And so there's that fear etched on the unconsciousness of the state across the region, that the 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 left somehow is the physical embodiment of the other, of those on the other side of the border, and that is part of the larger history of counter-revolution and anti-communist sentiment, um, going way back in the 1920s with British India, British officials were obsessed with communists, and uh, people like Bhagat Singh were accused of being anti-India and foreign agents by white judges and white administrators. So the white administrators were Indian, and Bhagat Singh was a foreigner. So this kind of perverse logic continues to play out. But I think over time, what's good is that in the larger cosmopolitan circle across the world, people are meeting, and there have been a lot of conferences on which leftists from both sides have been there. Nepal, in that sense, is a wonderful place where a lot of leftists from India and Pakistan meet. Bangladesh also. I was there earlier this year. I met a lot of comrades, so that was very heartening. Um, Also, a lot of young people in Pakistan follow the left in India. They follow JNU in particular. So there's all of that. So because of the shared history, there's a lot of interest, um, and one can hope once the tensions go down a bit, there will be some space open for collaboration between the left. At this point, it would be almost kind of reckless to do some kind of a direct collaboration between the two sides, because that would lead to all kinds of new complications. Um, and I think nobody wants that at this stage.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Um, I think this is a great conversation. I really
Thank you.
appreciate you coming on and enlightening all of us on sort of um, Pakistani politics and a little bit about Haqooq-e-Khalq. We can probably arrange another call and we can talk about what Haqooq-e-Khalq is doing, and we can.
Sure.
But I wanted to intro because a lot of my audience. I mean, I have members of my audience that are from Pakistan. Ammar Dani's one of them. But most of my
Mm.
audience are actually from India, and so they don't really understand sort of the internal workings of Pakistan as well as they understand the internal workings of India. So it was a very
Great.
important perspective to provide
I'm glad.
to people that might not. I mean, if you I don't know how much longer you want to go. If you have to go now, it's fine. I just realized that we've kept you on for
Uh,
about an hour and a half or so. But if
we
you
can we can do this again sometime soon.
for sure,
Uh, yeah, yeah. So that would be very, maybe talk more about the left as well. But thank you so much for letting me know. Like I've heard one of your discussions with Amar, and I think the even in the discussion today, you talked about the Tamils, and I think we could maybe do a little bit more on how to imagine some kind of a transnational left in South Asia. That's one of the big challenges, because um, you know it's one thing to actually not being able to meet people or collaborate with people across the board, but that should not limit our imagination. The state should not be setting the limits to our imagination. So, podcasts like yours open up the possibility for kind of having a different kind of conversation that we usually don't have too much time to think about in the everyday politics that we're doing here. But without that kind of a transnational South Asian or regional perspective, it's impossible to imagine uh, a strong left. So
100%.
we can't let the right have the monopoly over internationalism. The right, unfortunately, is more internationalist than the left. They're learning from each other all the time. They're meeting each other all the time. The fascists, the xenophobes, the chauvinists. I think the left also has to be firmly internationalists against the internationalism of the reactionaries.
Agreed, 100%. It's actually that's a sentiment that I've been echoing for quite a while. I think for
Hmm.
far too long, the reactionaries in both Pakistan and India have captured the narrative, and I think,
Hmm.
uh, I think we have to really start building bridges. It's not that bridges haven't been built. It's not that Indian and Pakistani and Bengali leftists haven't already started building those bridges. Those bridges have already existed, but I think right now, I think for so long we have basically not allowed, but like we have basically been broken by the states, by the various states in Southern Asia, and now, you know, I think it's time that we get out of that rut. But thank you
Absolutely.
so much, Amar.
Absolutely.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much, Aaron.
Appreciate
You
it,
take
and
care.
looking forward to
Thank you
having
to
you
your
on
listeners
again.
as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
That'll be a pleasure. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.